Hello, students of Room 72. It is me, your teacher, on YouTube. Yes, I'm that cool. I knew that you would miss me reading Holes because we got at such an exciting part. What's going to happen to Stanley? What's going to happen to Zero? So I thought, let me make a YouTube channel and then I can read to you every day. And maybe we'll learn something else. Maybe you'll see the dogs, my house, something to keep you interested in watching. So I'm going to start on chapter 35. So we're going back a little bit in the story where Stanley just discovers Zero under the Mary Lou in a tunnel and drinking sploosh. So let's just start there and then we'll continue, okay? Here we go, chapter 35. Zero's face looked like a jack-o'-lantern that had been left out too many days past Halloween, half rotten, with sunken eyes and a drooping smile. "Is that water?" he asked. His voice was weak and raspy. His lips were so pale they were almost white, and his tongue seemed to flop around uselessly in his mouth as he spoke, as if it kept getting in the way. "It's empty," said Stanley. He stared at Zero, not quite believing that he was real. "I tried to bring you the whole water truck, but," he smiled sheepishly, "I drove it into a hole." "I can't believe you're—" "Me neither," said Zero. "Come on, we gotta get back to camp." Zero shook his head. "I'm not going back." "You have to. We both have to." "You want some sploosh?" Zero asked. "What?" Zero shaded his eyes with his forearm. "It's cooler under the boat," he said. Stanley watched Zero crawl back through his hole. It was a miracle he was still alive, but Stanley knew he would have to get him back to camp soon, even if he had to carry him. He crawled after him and was just able to squeeze his body through the hole. He never would have fit when he first came to Camp Green Lake. He'd lost a lot of weight. As he pulled himself through, his leg struck something sharp and hard. It was a shovel. For a second, Stanley wondered how it got there, but then remembered that Zero had taken it with him after striking Mr. Pendanski. It was cooler under the boat, which was half buried in the dirt. There were enough cracks and holes in the bottom of the boat, now the roof, to provide light and ventilation. What does ventilation mean? "Oh, I hear you, Evan. I hear you, Anthony. I hear you, Naomi and Amelia. You're saying air, and you are right. Ventilation means air." He could see empty jars scattered about. Zero held a jar in his hand and grunted as he tried to unscrew the lid. "What is it?" "Sploosh." His voice was strained as he worked on the jar. "That's what I call it. They were buried under the boat." He still couldn't get the lid off. "I found 16 jars. Here, hand me the shovel." "What do you think sploosh is?" "It's found under the Mary Lou boat, which Sam owned." We're thinking, what is sploosh? See if we get any more clues. Stanley didn't have a lot of room to move. He reached behind him, grabbed the wooden end of the shovel, and held it out to Zero, blade first. "Sometimes you just have to," Zero said. Then he hit the jar against the blade of the shovel, breaking the top of the jar clean off. He quickly brought the jar to his mouth and licked the sploosh off the jagged edges before it spilled. "Careful," Stanley warned. Zero picked up the cracked lid and licked the sploosh off that as well. Then he handed the broken jar to Stanley. "Drink some." Stanley held it in his hand and stared at it a moment. He was afraid of the broken glass. He was also afraid of the sploosh. It looked like mud. Whatever it was, he realized, it must have been in the boat when the boat sank. That meant it was probably over 100 years old. Who knew what kind of bacteria might be living in it? Synonym for bacteria, everybody? Germs, you're right. "It's good," said Zero, encouraging him. He wondered if Zero had heard of bacteria. He raised the jar to his mouth and carefully took a sip. It was a warm, bubbly, mushy nectar, sweet and tangy. It felt like heaven as it flowed over his dry mouth and down his parched throat. He thought it might have been some kind of fruit at some time, perhaps peaches. Ding, 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 ding. You're right, Andrew. Probably those peaches that Catherine Barlow, the teacher, canned for Sam. Remember, he fixed up stuff at the schoolhouse and she paid him with jars of her sweet peaches. So, okay, we're seeing some connections here. Zero smiled at him. I told you it was good. Stanley didn't want to drink too much, but it was too good to resist. They passed the jar back and forth until it was empty. How many are left? He asked. None, said Zero. Stanley's mouth dropped. Now I have to take you back, he said. I'm not digging any more holes, said Zero. They won't make you dig, Stanley promised. They'll probably send you to a hospital like Barf Bag. Barf Bag stepped on a rattlesnake, said Zero. Stanley remembered how he'd almost done the same. I guess he didn't hear the rattle. He did it on purpose, said Zero. You think? He took off his shoe and sock first. Stanley shivered as he tried to imagine it. What's Mar-ya-la-o-oo? asked Zero. What? Zero concentrated hard. Mar-ya-la-o-oo. I have no idea. I'll show you, said Zero. He crawled back out from under the boat. Stanley followed. Back outside, he had to shield his eyes from the brightness. Zero walked around to the back of the boat and pointed to the upside-down letters. Mar-ya-la-o-oo. Stanley smiled. Mary Lou. It's the name of the boat. Mary Lou, Zero repeated, studying the letters. I thought Y made the ya sound. It does, said Stanley, but not when it's at the end of a word. Sometimes Y is a vowel, and sometimes it's a consonant. Too much information, Stanley. Vowels, consonants. Zero suddenly groaned. He grabbed his stomach and bent over. Are you all right? Zero dropped to the ground. He lay on his side with his knees pulled up to his chest. He continued to groan. Stanley watched helplessly. He wondered if it was a sploosh. He looked back toward Camp Green Lake. At least he thought it was the direction of Camp Green Lake. He wasn't entirely sure. Zero stopped moaning and his body slowly unbent. I'm taking you back, said Stanley. Zero managed to sit up. He took several deep breaths. Look, I got a plan so you won't get in trouble, Stanley assured him. Remember when I found the gold tube? Remember I gave it to X-Ray and the warden went crazy making us dig where she thought X-Ray found it? I think if I tell the warden where I really found it, I think she'll let us off. I'm not going back, said Zero. You've got nowhere else to go, said Stanley. Zero said nothing. You'll die out here, said Stanley. Then I'll die out here. Stanley didn't know what to do. He had come to rescue Zero and instead drank the last of his sploosh. He looked off into the distance. I want you to look at something. I just want you to look up at that mountain there. See the one that has something sticking up out of it? Yeah, I think. Ozzy is attacking my camera person, Allison. Hi, Ozzy. Say hi to the students. Look, he's attacking Allison. Ozzy, what do you think it is? Ozzy says, oh, I need a nap, he says. Okay, back to the story. What does it look like to you, Stanley said. Does it look like anything? Zero said nothing, but as he studied the mountain, his right hand slowly formed into a fist. He raised his thumb. His eyes went from the mountain to his hand, then back to the mountain. Chapter 36. They put 4 of the unbroken jars in the burlap sack in case they might be able to use them. Where do you think they're going? Back to Camp Green Lake? Thumbs up if you say, back to Camp Green Lake? Or do you think they're going to try to find Big Thumb, the mountain, the magical mountain, the mountain where Sam's onion fields grew, which were magic? Maybe the mountain similar to one that Stanley's dirty, rotten great-great-grandfather was supposed to carry Madame Zeroni up. Which way are they going? Stanley carried the sack and Zero held the shovel. I should warn you, Stanley said, I'm not exactly the luckiest guy in the world. Zero wasn't worried. When you spend your whole life living in a hole, he said, the only way you can go is up. They gave each other the thumbs up sign, then headed out. It was the hottest part of the day. Stanley's empty canteen was still strapped around his neck. He thought back to the water truck and wished he'd at least stopped and filled his canteen before running off. A lot of you said that. Alan, I think you might have said that. Eddie, I'm not sure. They hadn't gone very far before Zero had another attack. He clutched his stomach as he let himself fall to the ground. Stanley could only wait for it to pass. The sploosh had saved Zero's life, but now it was destroying him from the inside. He wondered how long it would be before he too felt the effects. He looked at Big Thumb. It didn't seem any closer than when they first started out. Zero took a deep breath and managed to sit up. Can you walk? Stanley asked him. Just give me a second, Zero said. He took another breath, then, using the shovel, pulled himself back to his feet. He gave Stanley the thumbs up sign, and they continued. Sometimes Stanley would try to go for a long while without looking at Big Thumb. He'd make a mental snapshot of how it looked, then wait maybe 10 minutes before looking at it again to see if it seemed closer. But it never did. It was like chasing the moon. And if they ever reached it, he realized then they'd still have to climb it. I wonder who she was, said Zero. Who? Mary Lou, said Zero. Stanley smiled. I guess she was once a real person on a real lake. It's hard to imagine. I bet she was pretty, said Zero. Somebody must have loved her a lot to name a boat after her. Yeah, said Stanley. I bet she looked great in a bathing suit, sitting in the boat while her boyfriend rowed. Why is that funny? Joanna, I see you laughing. Jennifer, I see you chuckling. Why is that funny? Because we know Mary Lou was a donkey. So picturing her in a bathing suit? No. I think we're going to stop there today, students of room 72. I love you and I miss you, and tomorrow we'll continue the journey to Big Thumb and see what Stanley and Zero are up to. Bye-bye for now. Tune in tomorrow. Please send me a comment or something, like a like. I don't know how this works, but something so that I know you were listening and maybe your name of who you are. Eagle tickets for all my listeners and viewers. Subscribe. I don't know what that means. I hear people say that. I'm just kidding. Tune in again tomorrow. Bye for now.